Okay, welcome everyone. I know some people are going to keep joining us. My name is Suzanne Grossman. I direct the Career Services Office for the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch. I know we have a lot of alumni with us and current students, so we're really excited. We're really excited to have our alum, Amy Chase from Palladium Group here, along with her colleague, Ian Wetherald. I'm also here with my colleague, Marnie Smith, raise her hand, who's in Marxe Career Services as well. We're going to start with a brief poll so we can see who is here with us. And I'm going to launch the poll, leave it open for like a minute. So you should see the poll asking you what your degree is from Baruch. Are you a student? Are you an alum? And then just curious about any career changers, just so that our speakers kind of know where people are coming from. See the answers coming in, about 18 responses so far, 20, 25, 26. Got a few more. So I'm going to share the results in just a second, but it seems like 70% are from the Marxe School. And then we have 66% current students and about another third are alumni. And a little over half are career changers. So any last minute votes? Okay, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. Marnie, can you see the results?
Yes.
Okay. So this should give our speakers a sense of who's here. A lot of graduate students from the Marxe School, which we expect, that's our office, undergraduates, Zicklin, and a fair number of current students. And then again, we have those almost a little over half of you consider yourselves career changers. Great. I'm gonna close that off. And I want to turn it over to Amy and Ian. I will say that we will do questions and answers at the end. Everybody, you're welcome to do that. Use the chat and put your questions as we go, but we will hold most questions, unless there's a reason, we'll put them toward the end, and then we'll go from there in terms of using the chat, and we may let people ask their own questions a little bit later. So, as we go, be thinking about your questions. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Amy and Ian to get started and to tell us all about the Palladium group and a little bit about their backgrounds as well, which are both very interesting.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you, Suzanne, for inviting us into this virtual event. I think this is one of the biggest ones I've been a part of since the whole pandemic started. So as Suzanne mentioned, my name is Amy Chase. I am a Baruch alum. I graduated with my BBA in marketing from Baruch in 2006. So today I have with me my colleague Ian Wetherald, who will join me in our conversation. So just give you a quick rundown of the agenda. Ian will go over an overview of Palladium, just to give you an introduction to the company. And then we will each share our professional backgrounds, tell you how we each ended up at Palladium. And then we'll also share a little bit about current projects and what we're working on. And then from there, we'll launch into a conversation about international development overall, to take questions, as Suzanne had mentioned. So Ian, why don't you go ahead? I'll share my screen so we can see the Palladium website as you're speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all today. So I guess to start out, we'll go over just sort of what Palladium is and what Palladium does. It is a global management consulting firm focused on international development. So we do projects all over the world that focus on creating a positive impact on locals and their lives. It's a very sort of broad industry and a broad company. It was originally founded in Australia, and the company has expanded to have centers in Brisbane, London, Washington, and New York and Dubai, and then local offices all over the world in many, many countries. So the projects that we do are really broad. In the office in DC, which focuses on the U.S. government as our main client and USAID as sort of the main agency, focus on health, economic growth, which is what the projects that Amy and I do are, and then also data science and conflict, civilization, and transition. Our other branches around the world also focus on the environmental impact and global warming, as well as humanitarian relief for the British government primarily. So it's very broad, but the main focus of everything we do is trying to create a positive impact on the world and improve people's lives. So our primary clients are governments. That would be the US government for, in our case, but then also the British and Australian government. We also have, I work on a project for the Swiss government as well, and there are some other governments that we work for. And then our New York office focuses on private clients, so corporate social responsibility. That's sort of a smaller practice for us that we're trying to expand into. Yes, that's sort of broadly what Palladium is. Amy, you want to take it away?
Sure. So before I stop sharing my screen, I just want to point out that if you guys are interested in, after our conversation today, if you're interested in exploring jobs at Palladium, we do have, we are hiring very rapidly right now. And I can say that on my project, we are looking for a couple of Spanish speakers. So if you're fluent in Spanish, send me an email, take a look at our career website. So let me get out of this and turn my attention back to you guys. So as I mentioned, I graduated from Baruch 2006 with my BBA in marketing and management. I then worked in publishing. I worked with some startups, some women-owned businesses, small businesses for about 10 years. I did it for about 10 years. And then I went to grad school for international affairs. So I did a complete career switch. And then I went to the new school. I focused on women's rights in conflict countries. So through the new school, I went to Kosovo. That was my first overseas assignment. Did a couple of trips out there. And then right after I graduated in 2011 from the new school, I came out here to DC. No job, just a couple of suitcases and a couple of friends out here. Rented a room in a group house of 6 people for $600 a month, and it was a very dangerous and decrepit house that we eventually got kicked out of because it just wasn't livable. And I just start all over again, basically. My last job in marketing and media was as a project manager. So when I came out, when I started again in a new career, I started back as a research assistant, as an intern, and then moved my way up to project assistant, project coordinator, and then project manager again. So in international development, I worked for a couple of pretty big NGOs and government contracting firms, and that's what Palladium is. So so in international development work, we have the nonprofits, the non-governmental organizations, and the private firms that also do government contracting, and that's what Palladium does. So before I go into my current work, I will send off to Ian again. Oh, forgot to mention, in addition to Kosovo, I've also worked in Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and Rwanda. So those were on different subject matters, ranging from elections support to anti-corruption, to monitoring and evaluation, and just doing business development work. So we can talk more about that. If anyone has any specific questions, feel free to throw them my way. Or Ian?
Yeah, I'm a little bit earlier on in my career than Amy. I've been working at Palladium for the last 2 years, and this has been my first job in the international development field. I actually graduated with a degree in art history back in 2016, and then spent 2 years as a property manager, at which point I realized that that job felt just a little bit evil, and I didn't want to do it anymore. So I sort of stumbled my way into this job in international development. Similar situation where I just sort of packed up, went to DC, and lived in a group house that was a bit decrepit for a while, and I'm still living in that house if I wasn't sort of quarantined at my parents' place right now. But yeah, so I'm much earlier on in my career, but it was also a pretty big career shift for me.
Yeah, I think the common thread here is that international development doesn't pay well. So if you're looking to you're looking to make a lot of money and be a millionaire by 35 or whatever that age you have in your mind is, yeah, don't don't come into international development. Look into the finance majors and accounting majors at Baruch, because Baruch has a great MBA program. And yeah, we definitely don't come into this work for the money. I mean, it's been great working overseas, but I've had to fall back onto my marketing background a couple of times. Most recently last year when I was laid off from the last NGO that I was working for, because the current administration had cut a couple of budgets that affected projects that we were working on in Honduras, Ecuador, and Mexico, in addition to the Usaid mission budget in Pakistan. So when the NGO lost all that business in all those programs and closed down all those offices, they didn't need me anymore at the DC office. So I was one of 9 people to get let go. And that was the second time I had ever been laid off in my entire life. The first time was in publishing. It was actually my first job after Baruch. So it's always traumatizing to go through layoffs. But I am very grateful that I have my my previous career that I could fall back on. And I have started my own business. I have a social enterprise that helps support diversity and inclusion in the workforce by equipping immigrants, refugees, and survivors of trauma with the necessary skill sets to advance in the workplace. So what I'm saying is, yeah, expect that if you are doing a career change, because I do remember seeing in the poll that there are a lot of people who are also career searchers, that if you're entering international development for the first time, don't undervalue yourself. Definitely look for jobs that are a match for your skill set, and don't think that you automatically have to live in a poorhouse. It's just that I want to manage expectations here and say that if you are looking to be, if you have financial goals in mind, this is really not the space for it. But people in international development are here because we want to make a positive impact in the world. So the project that I'm working on right now is called Catalyze. If you go into the Palladium website, we have a page on it. There isn't much detail on it yet because it is a brand new project. Palladium won it in October last year. It is a USAID funded project in the economic growth area, as Ian had pointed out earlier. And we are working, it is a global contract, which means that we don't just have one country that we're focusing on. We have activities across the world in Latin America, which is why we really need Spanish speakers, in Europe, the Balkans, Southeast Asia, as well as Africa. And I have managed pretty big projects before, especially in Afghanistan, but even for me, this is pretty pretty impressive in terms of scale and size. The budget is almost 250 million across 5 years. And 5 years is the base. If we have money left over at the end of 5 years, or if USAID decides that we're doing such great work, they want to extend the contract, we also have 3 option years that they can practice. And for those of you who don't really understand U.S. government contracting yet and the different mechanisms, the easiest way to describe this contract is that each USAID mission, which is usually right next door to a USAID, which is usually right next door to a USAID embassy, a U.S. embassy, sorry, they buy into this contract. So if let's say the USAID mission in Ethiopia wants to put some money towards economic growth, but they don't really quite know what the activity looks like, they will come to Palladium and say, hey, Catalyze team, we have this much money that we want to put towards helping farmers sell their excess surplus and produce. What can you come up with? That's where we come in and we help them co-design a project, and we use the budget that they give us. So I feel like that might be the easiest way to describe it. Yeah, if you guys have any specific questions more about it later, I can go into it. Ian, what are you working on?
Yeah. I have 3 smaller projects that I work on. One of them is in Lebanon, which is focused primarily on microfinance and credit for small and micro enterprises sort of all over the country. And then my other 2 projects are in North Macedonia. One of them the Lebanon was for the US government. In Macedonia, I have 2 projects, one of them for the US government and one for the Swiss government, which are both doing very similar work in the business enabling environment and sort of value chain spaces, trying to make targeted interventions within the Macedonian economy to create employment. That's the goal for those ones. They're $20 million in Lebanon and then 2 $6 million projects in Macedonia. So some more smaller and more targeted efforts there. I think that's all we wanted to go over as sort of introduction to for us. So I'd love to just go over to questions and let's start answering them.
Yeah, Suzanne did send us some questions preemptively. So I want to touch on those more broadly right now before we take on specific questions. And I did see some common questions about skill sets. What skill sets do you need to enter international development? And I would say foreign language is always a plus. Again, we're looking for Spanish speakers. We do have a few French speakers, but even the French speakers were hard to come by. Focus on writing skills. A lot of these countries don't have strong English, native speakers and writers. So those are usually in high demand if you're looking to work abroad. Budgeting, and also U.S. government contracting rules and regulations. If you can find any classes, I can also recommend a few organizations that do offer them on a regular basis. There was a second common theme I found in questions, and that was on specialization. And in international development, I always tell people, think about what you want to do on a day-to-day job function versus what subject matter area you want to be an expert on. So do you want to be a technical expert on elections? Because if you're a technical expert, your day-to-day will look very, very different from a program manager or an operations manager or a finance manager. So think about technical expertise versus your day-to-day job functions when you're looking at jobs. And then something else that international development is really well known for is consulting. We use a lot of consultants, and consultants are usually people who are very technical. So if you find that you're strong in one technical area, focus on honing that technical expertise. I can say with absolute certainty that monitoring and evaluation, as well as knowledge management, are 2 subject areas that we're always hiring for. And if you can't find if you don't want to do it full time, you can be a consultant. I have friends who have been M&E consultants for a couple of decades now, because schools are only now starting to teach the more practical skill sets, and that includes M&E and knowledge management. So I remember seeing one question about digital solutions as well. That's also a growing field, a growing area in international development. Palladium has a department that we're now growing called, and Ian can correct me if I'm saying this wrong, DIAS, which is Digital Innovations and Solutions. I
It's
believe.
we only ever call them DS, and then I
Yeah.
completely forget what it stands for every time. But yeah, they're data science guys. They do a lot of internal M&IE, but then they also do their own projects focusing mostly on health systems and using data science to strengthen health systems in a lot of times in Africa specifically.
Yep. So I just wanted to highlight those areas where if you really need a job right away, if you're interested in big data, definitely look at digital solutions, data, M&E, and knowledge management.
I have a question.
Mhm.
The jobs you are talking about, and you said like you're really looking for Spanish speakers right now. Are these jobs that people could do from New York? I'm sure we're going to get that question about, you know, do people need to move to DC or what about New York opportunities or remote?
Yeah, so I'd say we do have a New York office. It is fairly small though, and they're focused on our commercial innovation practice. So instead of going after our typical clients of large governments, they go after corporations and investment firms who basically are looking to buff up their corporate social responsibility. And so, I mean, there are definitely opportunities there in the New York office. I would say that given the sort of what we've been going through over the last few months, the opportunities for working remote have grown quite a lot. I mean, we've all been working remote for 3 or 4 months now, and I think that going forward, that's going to be more and more of an option. And I do know that people have worked in jobs that were more sort of DC related out of the New York office. So I think that I think it would be highly encouraged to move down to DC, but I don't think that's required.
Yeah, I would say that normally under normal circumstances, it would be easiest to come to DC in person because DC is known for networking, I would say, let me see, out of all my jobs so far here in DC, I got because I knew someone, except for one that I applied to blindly and actually got an interview. So only one job where I applied online and actually got an interview on my own without having to know anyone in the organization that made a plug for me. Yeah, networking is super important. As one of my Afghan friends said when he moved here, he said, oh, here in DC, you call it networking. Back home, we call it nepotism. So that's one way to look at it. Who you know is super important. So that's why I always tell people, yes, come to DC if you can, even if you're just here for a few weeks, so you can start building up that network. And it's, as far as the our projects go, it could also be on a project basis too. The people at Usaid who oversee the CalEyes contract made it very, very clear that they would prefer for our staff to be based here in DC. But again, that's under normal circumstances, whereas some other projects may be a little bit more flexible.
And what about interns? Does the company have interns? Graduate interns, undergrad interns?
Yeah, we do have interns. I know that we had, I think, 1 or 2 over the summer last year. We wanted to sort of start growing that program. I think that went on a bit of a pause due to the current circumstances. That kind of got dropped off the list of important things this summer. Although I might be wrong there because I'm fairly disconnected from the office right now. But yeah, we definitely do have interns, usually who are post-grad, because it is, we do sort of treat interns as a full job that gets to get into the nitty-gritty of the work and not sort of fetching coffee and doing filing.
Great. Are you both ready for me to invite questions? That sounds good? Yeah. Okay, so at this point, we will open it up to question and answer. You can put your questions in the chat. You can raise your hand, and we'll invite you to unmute yourself. Or you could put in the chat that you have a question, and I'll try to go in the order that I see the questions. So any questions for Amy and for Ian? And Marnie, if I'm not seeing anyone with a hand raised, I see Eduardo right in front of me. Eduardo, I'll invite you. Let's see. How do Marnie, can you remind me about the unmuting? Do I have to unmute everybody? for them to talk? I can't hear you.
Yes, do you want me to unmute Eduardo?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
Hi, thank you. I'm a graduate. I'm an alum. I have my specialty is actually CUNY BA. Baruch was my alma mater. I lived right up the street from Baruch. I worked at the UN for 30 years. I've been, in October, it will be a year that I'm out of the UN. I'm from Venezuela. I'm trying to reinvent myself, and I'm always very interested in providing back to the Baruch community because I find it a great university, and I was planning on doing a master's degree there. But coronavirus arrived, and my question was referring to the UK Pact in Colombia. I'm a native Spanish speaker. My minor is in translation and interpretation. I've gotten a lot of awards. So the particular jobs that I was looking at, there were only 2 available in the Palladium website. And I meant to get in touch with Amy after the Zoom meeting. And I just wanted to ask you guys a little bit more regarding the UK Pact. And because it seems like the 2 positions available that I saw in Colombia were particularly suited to my skill set. I'm a project manager. I did sustainable development, carbon reduction, award-winning recycling program at the United Nations. 30 years there. We even got a Nobel Peace Prize shortly after I graduated in 2001. So it's, I'm a kind of a jack of trades, and I've been trying to reinvent myself, not necessarily my career. And Colombia is right next to Venezuela, and I'm particularly in tune with the situation. There are 5.5 million Venezuelan refugees around the world, 1.5 million in Colombia, I believe, or a little bit less. And I think it would be a great opportunity for me to move down there. I'm just not quite sure how to go about it. And Amy, you can have my apartment when I leave if I get chosen. But the UK Pact is very important to me, and I wanted to, if you guys could fill me in a little bit more on exactly what that is. I saw the Palladium website, but it didn't go into detail. So I was looking forward to the meeting with you guys.
I'm not super familiar with that specific project. Our company is, because we have such sort of broad global reach, can't really stay on top of everything. I will say that typically when we are advertising positions for our local offices, our project offices, they're looking for local nationals. A lot of our ethos in international development is to focus on empowering local nationals to help them improve their own country. And they have obviously the greatest expertise in their own country. And so most of the time when our advertisements are for local positions, we are looking for local nationals, although in that specific context, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that either. Yeah, Eduardo, feel free to send us an email after this because a lot of your questions sound very specific to your own experience. But you bring up good question. Yeah, but actually, you just raised a good point too with Ian, is that when you guys are looking for jobs and reading these job descriptions, make sure it says U.S. national, because especially Usaid, they love promoting local nationals first. I mean, in Afghanistan, we had to follow the initiative Afghans first. So there were actually very few expat positions in the field except for leadership roles. So if you're just entering the space, it would be, if the positions are really more senior, it will be hard to go straight out into the field unless you're starting off as a volunteer of some sort, or if you have a specific skill set that you can sell as a consultant.
Okay, great. I have some questions in the chat. Ben would like to know, what is M&E? Also, how is the current federal administration affecting your work in international development?
M&E stands for monitoring and evaluation, and I can type it into the chat box for everyone. M&E is the practice of using data that's collected by beneficiaries to help monitor and track the progress of a project. At the most basic definition. So a lot of international affairs schools are now starting to offer it as a technical class. When I went to the new school, they didn't offer it. And to answer the second question, as I mentioned before, I was laid off of my last job last year because the administration had cut budgets in Latin America and in Pakistan. So I was one of 9 people to get let go. While I was laid off, I had to fall back on my marketing skills, and I was consulting as a multicultural marketing consultant for a few months before I came to Palladium.
I think
so. Ian,
yeah, expand on that second point. I think that it can be it's very variable what has been the effect from the current administration. I know that for my particular project, there hasn't been a huge impact except for some increased scrutiny in Lebanon. I think that would have come either way. I know that our projects, especially in Guatemala and El Salvador, have been affected quite severely, as you might have read a year ago when sort of foreign aid was cut off, even though that is sort of a nonsensical statement once you dig into the details of it, from the Golden Triangle countries. And so those projects were affected quite severely, while sort of the ones I was working on in the Middle East and in Europe were not. And a lot of the projects in Africa, I don't think, have either. In general, the foreign aid budget from Congress has been pretty steady over the past few decades and has not been affected by different administrations. Those administrations might have different priorities and might move those funds around, but at the large scale, it's been a pretty steady sort of funding stream from Congress, and therefore a fairly steady industry as a whole.
Yeah, the foreign assistance budget continues to be less than 1% of the overall federal budget, but it has stayed fairly consistent, as Ian pointed out, regardless of who's been in office. So another example that just came to mind as Ian was speaking was that when I was actually working at USAID when the current administration first came to office, and they had, and we were immediately affected by the Mexico City policy, or the gag rule, which says that that foreign assistance funds are not allowed to be used to promote abortion or to put towards abortion clinics or to support abortion in any way, shape, or form. So when I was at USAID, we were all called to an all-hands meeting to let us know that we were going to be defunding some programs that we were doing in China because our programs were specifically supporting their public health system, and because China does allow abortions and have abortion clinics in their public health system, we were therefore supposed to cut that funding.
Thank you. There's a question about the resources for learning about USAID contracts and regulations. I think you referred to that a little bit before, Amy. Anything more specific, or we could send things around too in the follow-up if it's easier.
Yeah, so a lot of our funding for these projects come from USAID, State Department, and sometimes from other government agencies as well, like DOD, USDA, maybe even Department of Treasury. Ian, I'm not sure if you've worked on other projects funded by other federal agencies before, but it always helps to be aware of U.S. government funding regulations. Every agency has a different set of regulations for their assistance and acquisitions. Assistance meaning non-contractual, and acquisitions are contracts.
And where do you find out about how do you better understand that if you're trying to be competitive for jobs?
I would say one website I always recommend is the Humentum website. They provide these courses. I mean, they're pretty expensive. It is an investment. I've been fortunate enough that I've had employers pay for them. Another good resource is the Society for International Development. They offer workshops and a lot of great networking opportunities. I'm actually the co-chair of one of them, and we do offer more practical events in offering tools and resources that people who are just entering into the space might need.
What was
I would also say devx.com is a very good resource. It's basically like monster.com, but specifically for development. So it's got job openings all across the industry, and then also resources for learning more about the industry as a whole.
Great. What was the first website you said, Amy? The one that was expensive?
Humentum.
Humentum. Okay.
Yeah, Humentum, Insight NGO. I'll type these into the chat box for everyone. You can just Google them.
Great. Next question. Nana says, I know you mentioned needing Spanish speakers at the moment. Is there any need for French, or do you think there'd be a need in future projects? And then someone was also asking about Arabic speakers.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak to that. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of development work happening in Francophone Africa. So especially if you're interested in that area of the world and you speak French, then that is extremely useful skill set for those projects. I know a lot of our projects in our health practice work in that area of the world. Arabic as well, definitely useful. As I said, one of my projects is in Lebanon. Luckily, it's not hard to find people in Lebanon who do speak very good English. It's a very well-educated population, but that is not true for all of the Middle East. And so there is a ton of, especially American, but also global aid funding going to the Middle East in plenty of countries there. So Arabic is definitely a useful skill set.
And for the Spanish speaking role, are there any particular skills for the project you'd want the person to have? Vivian is asking that.
So on Catalyze, we are looking for 2 Spanish speakers, one at the associate level, which is our junior level position. And for that, we don't really require much in terms of even familiarity with international development, because Ian's a great example here. He came from a background that was completely unrelated to international development, and we our associate's jobs are really to learn. And the role is to offer them the opportunities to learn and to explore their own interests within Palladium, so they can decide where to go within their career, whether that's with Palladium or with a different organization after the time with us. And the second position, the second Spanish-speaking position is for project manager, and that one is mid-level, and that we do require experience in international development already, and quite a significant amount of experience working on Usaid projects.
Okay. Theo is asking if can consultants work from New York City? I'm not sure if he means at Palladium or generally in the space. Do you all have consultants? Like, how do you find consultants? You brought that up before. Are you talking about on the Palladium?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to depend on what exactly we need our consultants to do, but I would say that location is not really a priority when it comes to consultants. It's always skill set, and consultants can really work from anywhere. So yeah, I don't think working from New York is any problem at all for a consultant.
And are those on your site as well, or do you find them through other sources? They're on the site.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, on the Palladium website, you can find the consultant positions on the career page, and also the tenders page.
Okay. I think you answered this, but we can try, maybe there's something new to say, but is international experience required when applying to roles in this space? As someone trying to pivot, would project management, problem solving in a different industry be valuable? So yeah, where is international experience sort of a must-have versus positions that maybe are not as strictly looking for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I can speak to because I had no international work experience at all before coming into the industry. I had lived overseas when I was a kid, and I had sort of used that in the interview to sort of argue that I had international experience to look better. But honestly, that doesn't have much of an effect on what you do on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I mean, I had really no international work experience at all before coming into this. And I don't think that has been a huge detriment. I know that we do hire a lot of people out of, say, the Peace Corps, but I think a lot of that happens to do with people who go into the Peace Corps then learn about the industry from that. So the pool of people who we hire often does include people with international experience, but those are the people who are applying. I don't think it's necessary coming into the industry for the first time.
Okay. Yeah. Amy, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I get the question a lot when I do mentoring for more junior level folks, or even people who are just entering the industry for the first time, regardless of age. The question is, how do I get to the opportunities to travel? Because I like to travel, and I always tell them, look at the job description, because jobs that require travel will actually be very upfront. It will say, this job requires or anticipates 50% travel, or 75, or whatever the percentage is that's really standard in our industry. And during the interview, don't be afraid to ask. I see that for this role, there will be some travel that will be required. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And for entry-level roles like associate positions or project assistant positions, the organization should not expect you to have any overseas experience yet, because at that point in your career, unless you came from the Peace Corps, I don't think that it's fair for any recruiter to expect that of people. From an inclusion standpoint and diversity standpoint, it's very unfair, because there are people from certain communities and segments of the population who don't have access or the privilege to live abroad or work overseas at any point in their lives, and that job is supposed to offer them that experience.
Great.
I would also say that international experience does tend to be a plus on a resume. So and that doesn't necessarily have to be work experience. So if you have the opportunity to do any sort of international volunteering, really anything that would drop you in the middle of a country and force you to figure stuff out, that kind of experience is really useful. And I don't think that work is specifically what's required.
Yeah, for those of you who are still undergrads, definitely take advantage of the study abroad office and spend some time abroad, even if it's just 1 month, during the holidays. I spent a lot of time at the study abroad office at Baruch during my undergrad, and I ended up, because I couldn't decide on one country to study abroad in, I did a semester at sea. So that dropped me off in a bunch of different countries over the course of a semester. And then I used that to, sorry, my cat is joining us. And I used that to actually leverage my grad school application for international affairs. And I just wrote my admissions essay on one of the countries that had a profound impact on me.
Very nice. Let's see, Denise wants to know a little bit more about the project you're working on in South America, and is there a web page for it? And also, specifically, does it work in Brazil? And there was another question about the company's work in Brazil.
I'm not aware of any work in Brazil.
We do have work in Brazil.
We do?
Yeah.
Which area is it?
Specifically out of our commercial innovation practice in New York, is working with private companies in Brazil, and then also I think out of our UK office through DFAT. I'm not super familiar with those projects since they're not out of our office, but the Navy, you can talk about Catalyze. Fascinating project.
Yeah, so under the Catalyze contract, we are working in a number of Latin America countries, including Peru, and that's why we need the Spanish speakers. We're specifically doing education finance in Latin America. So that means working with private schools to raise capital to to improve curriculums, hire teachers, doing that kind of work.
Thanks. Can you talk, Nai wants to know, can you talk more about the focus of the roles in the New York office? Are there only certain functions that reside in New York, or are there certain team members located in New York who are also on the DC, on the core teams in DC?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the New York office is focused on what we call our commercial innovation practice. So instead of going towards government projects and government clients, they're focused on private clients, mostly corporate social responsibility. So it is a very, it's sort of in the nitty gritty of it, it actually ends up being very different because contracting can be so completely different when it's done on the commercial market rather than the sort of government contracting side. But as far as sort of broad skill sets, as far as project management goes, I think they're very, very similar. I've talked to some of our guys up in New York, and they do a very similar job to us. It's just focused with a different lens on different clients. I think there are some, the office in New York is pretty small and is getting filled up, although our office in DC also is overcrowded. Before the pandemic, we all had to leave. So I know that there were some opportunities. I know people did spend some time working up in New York or work in DC. Although I think that the sort of practice of bringing people on remotely is going to be expanded pretty greatly from now going forward, as we've been onboarding a lot of people during the pandemic. Amy started remotely. She hasn't spent any time in the office at all. So I think opportunities for that have expanded greatly, although it was not sort of typical in the past.
Sure. Great. Alina is asking, for someone more junior or mid-senior, is there any travel abroad on a project, or are traveling opportunities more reserved for senior leadership? I'm curious how or if you get to see the impact of your work.
Yeah, so in my first year at Palladium, sort of getting dropped in the deep end, I got to go out to Macedonia in my first 6 months and now to Lebanon back in October, actually, which was an interesting time to be in Lebanon if you're paying attention to the news over there. It sort of comes down to a lot of times what you can advocate for and what you can push for, and the teams in the different areas. Since we are project-based, it really depends on what the project is and what you can get out of it. When I went to Lebanon, I was very lucky that our local staff there really emphasized having the home office staff back in DC get to see the groundwork that's happening in the country, because it's very valuable for us to really see the faces and meet the people who were impacting. So I got to spend quite a lot of time just driving all over Lebanon, going to places that you wouldn't ever be able to go if you were a tourist, and just meeting a lot of the wonderful people who we are helping on a day-to-day basis, which to me was so important to a job that tends to be a lot of spreadsheets and writing, to see who that actually impacts at the end of it. But we do tend to try to get the new staff out into the field sometime in their first year, because if you don't feel that impact, then it's hard to do the job.
Okay.
Yeah, what Ian just described is exactly how an international development firm should operate. That's the model. If you find yourselves, for junior level staff, if you find yourselves in an organization where they use travel as a reward, leave, because that is a very toxic environment. Like I said earlier, as a project assistant or an associate, your job there is to learn. And that means getting the opportunities to travel out to the field to meet the beneficiaries, to meet the staff there, basically getting the exposure and experience that Ian just described.
Great. Ben is asking, can you share your perspectives on why is management consulting in international development not well paid? Usually management consultants and business development folks are very well compensated. And I guess I have a tag on to that question. Like, if you're finishing a master's program and you have, in international affairs or something, I guess I'm wondering, like, a starting salary, our average starting salaries for our programs tend to be like anywhere from like 55 to 65 in the median. Are we saying something along those lines, or just to give us like a sense, because I feel like it's a little bit subjective, the term well paid?
So when I came out here to DC, my first job as a project assistant, again, that was at an NGO, and I was I actually got a couple of opportunities to travel out to our field office in Baghdad. I was making, I believe I was making somewhere between 38 and 42. And then my next job after that was 48,000 a year. The salary bands are pretty low, and that is a lot of it has to do with the funding. A lot of the funding comes from the government. So but if you go over to if you do management consulting over on the defense side, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, I also started at 45 when I started in the industry. There's definitely a big difference between the corporate development side, which we work in, and the NGO side. Any organization that's working off of donations is going to be a lot tighter on their home office labor budgets. I would also say that, yeah, just echo what you said. When you think of management consulting, you think of really big firms in New York who are working for massive corporate clients who can just dump money on things. And the government will do that when it comes to defense, but will not do that when it comes to providing humanitarian aid or development overseas. So a lot of our budgets tend to be a lot tighter. And then also, you know, on a sort of on our level, when we're budgeting out these projects, you know, it does sometimes feel that we're sort of taking away money from the people who we're trying to help by getting a salary. So as our salaries go up, it can feel like we're, you know, doing less good. So I think that a lot of us are willing to sort of accept the lower pay for our skill set because we really believe in the work we're doing. And, you know, that's something that Amy, I'm sure you experienced over your career overseas, but when I've gotten to go out into the field, any qualms I had about my paycheck just sort of disappeared.
Yeah, and there are opportunities to work on the more corporate side and get more of the your standard management salary, and that's with the firms that you guys are already all very familiar with in New York, and that's KPMG, Deloitte, Accenture. They're all here in DC, and a lot of them have really big contracts with the DoD. So some of them do work in the international development space as well, but it's a very, very small area. But that is one area that you can explore if you're interested. They pay a lot better.
Alina is asking, how do you track success or impact once a project goes live?
That's very much going to depend on the project. So a lot of times the goals for any project are set out very clearly in the contract with Usaid, and then sort of your goals are set ahead of time. So, you know, for my project in North Macedonia, we're measured on employment. So we're looking at how many jobs have our interventions created, and our interventions can be anything from sending representatives from a tourism board over to London to promote tourism in Macedonia, to buying milking machines for dairies in Macedonia. And both of those will sort of lead down the line to increase employment for people in those industries. And that's what we're measured against. Whereas the measurements for our project in Lebanon sort of fall under employment, but also financing, because a lot of that is microfinance to small businesses. So it involves more of sort of an increased income from expansion of business. We also have health projects that focus on you know, health policy in a country, and they're looking at increasing health outcomes. Environmental projects have very different measurements, and a lot of them are very much tailored to the specific goals of the project in the specific context.
Great. Eduardo's asking, how is the pandemic affecting the way you do your work abroad, especially as far as South America? But I think it's a good question generally for the pandemic.
Yeah, SID actually, SID, the Society for International Development, which I mentioned earlier, they actually did a webinar on this, our panel virtual event on this recently about what the new normal looks like for implementation, for project implementation. And for us at Palladium, I feel like we're experiencing it through less travel. Like I said, my project just started in October, and normally within the first year, there are a lot of trips out to the countries that we're working in to set up the field offices, to hire the local staff, make sure all the systems are in place. But right now we can't do that. I mean, I have a feeling that if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have at least one trip under my belt by now. I started in April. So that's one way that we're being affected.
On the other side of that, because we're a company that has been set up for all of us to travel a lot for work, and for our local staff to be working with those same systems to be able to travel a lot, we were all able to sort of immediately start working from home, sort of on a day's notice. And so the transition from even at the local staff level to our level at the home office has been, there have been some rough patches, of course, but I think relatively smooth when compared to some of my friends who work in other industries. And then a lot of our projects are able to sort of pivot to respond directly to the current crisis as it affects each country individually. I'm not super aware of what our health projects are doing because they're mostly health policy. But for my projects, we have gotten specific, a new initiative in North Macedonia to provide financing to small businesses to keep them afloat during the economic turmoil there, which was already, the economy was the problem in that country, and now this is just affected it more. And then in Lebanon, we were already in crisis response mode in that country, and this pandemic kind of just honestly was a drop in the bucket there. So not much of a change, actually.
Thank you. So just a couple more questions. We're approaching 2 o'clock and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. There's a question, is it rare for people to transition into, I guess, the company or the space with at a mid or senior level? So, I guess it's probably, I'm guessing the person has significant experience already, but in a different sector.
It really depends on your skill sets. If you have skill sets that are immediately transferable, then that makes it a little easier. I can say that our project, should I remember his formal title, but on our project, his title is Chief of Party, or COP. He came from the private financial investment sector. So that was the experience that he brought with him to the international development side in the economic growth projects. So he provided that lens of here's how private banks operate, and here's how we can work with them through government funding. So it really depends on your background and your experience. For me, I couldn't immediately transfer my marketing skills into international development, which is why I decided to go back for my master's and use that as a stepping stone.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference there between sort of the technical side of the work and the management side. The technical side, if you have a skill set that can sort of be translated from another industry into development, which is often what, as management consultants we're sort of looking for on a technical level, I think it's fairly simple to transfer those skill sets over. On the management level, you can be very good at managing a project, but not know the weird details of U.S. government contracting and Usaid contracting that you do need to learn to sort of be effective at your job. And so a lot of coming in at that, doing project management does end up being at sort of a ground level and then working your way up.
Great. So I feel like people could ask questions all day, but I did want to ask Ian and Amy if what's the best way for folks to follow up if they want to ask some more questions or connect with you. If people are serious about applying for something, what would be the best way for them to, would you be interested in them letting you know, or what would you like to do to follow up?
Yeah, I am leaving my LinkedIn address in the chat box, as well as my email. And Ian, how would you feel about being contacted? Can I put your email address in there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll throw my LinkedIn there as well. And then obviously the best way to get in touch with the company about any open positions is to apply online. If it has to do with something in the EG space, then you can definitely get in touch with Amy and I. We can let people know that you were part of this event. If it's something out of that space, then we sort of have less influence, I would say.
Yeah, and again, outside of Palladium, as I mentioned earlier at the start of this conversation, I also run a social enterprise, and I work specifically on with first generation third culture kids, immigrants, refugees, and people of color to gain skill sets in the workplace. So that's something else we can talk about if you're interested.
Great. Sounds good. So please join me in thanking Amy and Ian for being here today. This was very, very interesting. I'm sure you'll get a variety of LinkedIn requests and follow-ups. So we very much appreciate your time and look forward to keeping in touch with you and hearing how things are going, and who knows, maybe doing another event together in the future. So be well, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.